Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. This is where we take a look at the big events, reports and releases coming up this week that give insight into the economy and a look back at what happened last week too. I'm Sean Aylmer, and every Monday I'm joined for the week ahead by economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekouk.com, Thekouk, thekouk.com, and on Twitter using the handle thekouk. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
I'm tired, getting towards the end of the year, but I'm well.
Good. You would have been pretty exhausted by the end of last week. It was quite the week for the economists.
So much information, the market gyrations too, as we got the news or otherwise of this new variant of the coronavirus coming through. So it was a combination of that market volatility, which was unbelievable. There were huge gyrations in the stock market, in bond prices, in the currency markets. And then we had the GDP numbers for the September quarter, which I think surprised just about everybody that they weren't as bad as feared. Now, it sort of sounds a bit funny when you rejoice at a GDP figure of minus 1.9% for the quarter. It was a big fall in GDP, there's no denying. But given that we know that it was going to be happening, why it occurred, the lockdowns obviously, and the fact that people in New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT couldn't get out and spend much, we were fearing a number, a good deal worse. So in a sense, when it came out at minus 1.9, and given that we know that the economy is already recovering into the December quarter, the one that began on the 1st of October, that it wasn't a bad result.
Yeah, it just seems that people this last lockdown, they've sort of learned to live with lockdowns a lot better than they did in 2020.
Yes, and I think the vaccination rates are clearly helping, and the fact that, at least in Australia, the consequences of getting the virus aren't quite as bad, whereas in 2020, I think we're all very nervous about what it might mean. Now, I'm not saying it's good, but, people are pretty much of the view now that, yes, we'll lock down, we'll hold back our spending, and then when the virus is contained and the authorities open up again, we go out and spend, and that certainly seems to be the case. So, we're sort of coping with how to deal with little hot spots or little outbreaks of this rotten virus.
House price figures were out last week for November as well. They're still growing, but slowing in terms of the growth rate.
Yep, house prices growing but slowing. I think that's a good summary, because what we did see, house prices up just a little bit over 1% in the month. And look, we had a bit of a divergence from capital city to capital city. Brisbane and Adelaide were the boom cities. They're increasing at sort of 2.5% to 3% month on month. Sydney's cooling, goodness me, if that's the right word, to just under 1%. Melbourne was a little bit weaker. So in a sense, I think what we're seeing is, in broad terms, just the start of perhaps a bit of a cooling in this house price boom. Regional areas are still growing very strongly. I suspect that's because they were cheap, and a lot of city slickers all cashed up are looking to buy in these regional cities and towns. So, look, the housing market's still pretty buoyant, but as we also saw with some of the lending data for housing, that there's a bit of a cooling coming off. It's not a decline, don't get me wrong, but it's just the rate of growth is slowing.
Well, that's last week. We'll be back in a moment and get into the week ahead. I'm with economist Stephen Koukoulas, aka The Kouk. Stephen, big week. Of course, the highlight being tomorrow's board meeting from the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, tomorrow the RBA board meeting. It's their last meeting until February. They don't meet in January. So in a sense, it's an opportunity for them to sort of recast some of their thoughts on the economy. Now, they're unlikely to do anything much in terms of a policy stance. The buying of bonds will still be there. They might signal that February they'll end it. They're probably unlikely to be using the meeting tomorrow to sort of say that rates are going to be brought forward from the 2024 rate hiking scenario that they've got in place at the moment. But they've got to acknowledge that even in the US, Fed Chairperson Powell have acknowledged that inflation is no longer just a transitory issue. It seems to be a little bit more entrenched. So I think they've just got to continue to soften up for the possibility, at least, that maybe the economy is a little bit stronger than they feared. Maybe it's a little bit prone to some inflation risks. And if that isn't the case, then they'll be pragmatic, I suppose is the word, and look to hike earlier than they're currently thinking. So, look, always interesting to see what they've got to say about the economy, on wages, on the labour market, and these sorts of issues. But for the moment, it'll probably go pretty much through to the keeper, and we'll revisit everything when we all convene in early February.
Mind you, we will hear from Philip Lowe, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, so maybe he'll have a little more to say.
Yeah, and the last few months, in fact, he's been a lot more open, is my observation, having looked at RBA speeches and the written word. But when he does have a speech and when he's subjected to some Q&A, which of course he's very, very happy to engage in, he's really candid, and I think he's acknowledging that, and this is, of course, a very true issue, it's really hard to read the economy during these lockdowns and with the coronavirus and its various forms coming through right now. And so, in a sense, and it sort of alluded to what we were saying just before, that a minus 1.9 GDP result is considered to be pretty good. It's because the volatility in the hard data on the economy is so extreme, and it's so hard to read the economy. So he's been really, really candid. So maybe he'll just sort of flag the possibility that, hey, if we get through to the middle of next year, the economy's recovered, there's no more variants of the virus, he may look to be bringing forward that timing of the first rate hike.
It kind of brings the point. Philip Lowe is a lot more candid than his predecessor, Glenn Stevens, and I'm sure you know them both. Glenn is certainly a lot more circumspect or introverted. He's going to be chair of Macquarie Bank, which I actually found quite surprising, shall we say, because Macquarie is not an introverted organisation, but Glenn Stevens is certainly a quieter guy. Phil Lowe is a lot louder. Would you agree?
He is. And Phil, I think in the early years, pre-COVID, Phil was what I'd classify very much a textbook central banker. He relied heavily on his models. He relied heavily on the forecasts. And arguably, if we look back to that period, it was one reason why they didn't cut, even though rates were low, they didn't cut back in 2018, 19, even though inflation was below their target, where other central banks did, because he was looking at the sort of academic side of central banking. But then along came, the virus, and he changed. And I think with that, he became, as we were just saying, a lot more open to ideas and discussion and frankly, scenarios. And I think that's a good thing.
The other data that we should just mention this week, job vacancies. Obviously, the employment market and wages is critical to interest rates.
It is, and the various indicators that we've got on job vacancies have been that they're trending higher. Even during the lockdowns, the falls were very moderate, and since the lockdowns have ended, we've got some evidence from some of the other vacancy series that they're coming back. So demand for labour is running red hot. I don't think there's much doubt that when we sort of finally get the labour force data reflecting what's happening in the post-lockdown economy, we'll be seeing an unemployment rate back into the mid-fours, something like that. And if these job vacancy numbers are very strong, that'll be entirely consistent with a sharp improvement in the labour market.
Have a great week, Stephen.
Thank you, Sean. You too.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kouk. You can find him at thekouk.com and follow him on Twitter using the handle The Kouk. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.